Greetings and peace. I would like to start this with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Peace be with you and yours. This presentation I wanted to do covering Shaykh Wahid Azal's articles on how people, let's say throughout their lives, who are survivors of sexual abuse, right? How sometimes they become spiritual narcissists, or those that refuse to address their trauma, but yet they continue with this spiritual facade and basically hurt themselves and hurt others through self, relationships, etc. So this is an in-depth exploration of that. So without further ado, let's begin. I represent myself only, and this is for entertainment purposes only. As we begin, we look how this presentation explores how survivors of sexual trauma, especially women, sometimes adopt mystical or spiritual personas as survival strategies. These masks often conceal unresolved trauma, resulting in spiritual narcissism, a state where pain is masked as transcendence. Now, sexual trauma and psychic fragmentation can be looked on how survivors of rape or prolonged sexual abuse may develop structural disassociation. The psyche splits to protect the self, leading to disorders like complex PTSD or DID, the dissociative identity disorder. And their mystical identity often becomes a coping mechanism to bind the fragments. And it's like you have, let's say, women that I've seen in high school or colleges or in my adult life in America, who yet, even when they claim to be spiritual people or enlightened or better in some way, but that hypersexualization is still there, where they're still hurting people in relationships, jumping from one partner to another, and then always blaming their trauma rather than accepting accountability or finding ways to fix that so they're not hurting others and self in the process. This is where that fragmentation comes in. Now, mysticism as a trauma mask is, the mystical language allows survivors to symbolically encode their trauma. Rather than speak directly of abuse, their prose becomes a metaphorical and esoteric, right? For example, unknowing as prerequisite. This spiritual expression becomes a mask rather than a healing process. So I've seen this a lot with white women in America, where they will always talk about something happening at a young age concerning their fathers and how that traumatized them and their families. There is a hint, and you can put two and two together. Okay, this person is refusing to address the issue directly, or they're not going to mention, that they were essayed, if you know what I'm saying. But yet they will say something about something happening with their fathers, and then you put the dots together. Okay, this person never had any stable relationship. They can't understand love because of experiencing a betrayal at a young age, and also the aspect of jumping from one relation to another. So I've seen this so much with white women in America, and thank God for Islam and how we love and protect our women, sisters, and daughters, because a sick society often produces these kind of results. Now we look at the disassociation and its spiritual repackaging. Now, disassociating detaches emotional pain from memory. In some spiritual context, it's rebranded as quote-unquote non-attachment or ego death. Yet for trauma survivors, it isn't transcendence. It's a disconnection from the self, which can mislead both the individual and followers. Now, the mystic's prose is often intellectually elliptical. Now, this isn't poetic flair, but a protective firewall. Complexity serves to confuse, making scrutiny difficult. In extreme cases, this becomes a control mechanism over others seeking clarity. Now, this is another thing that I've seen, not only the trauma excuse while being sexually promiscuous, but they just go completely blank sometimes, where they fail to communicate properly. Something shuts their mind off or their communication off. That's like an on-off switch. And when the person comes back on, it's like, they knew of everything that was going on. So there is something that's there. Now, the pendulum swings in an interesting way with spiritual narcissism. Now, survivors, they swing between shame and grandiosity, right? Where the grandiose state is not arrogance but a fragile construct to avoid feelings of annihilation. Once it's spiritualized, it calcifies into spiritual narcissism, where teachings are veiled, right, and demands for validation. Now we look at a case study, right? Let's say there's a woman named R, right? And R's writings exemplify this pattern. She urges others to choose love or work for union, but these aren't relational, invitations. They are rigid prescriptions derived from unresolved psychic chaos, and her spiritual guidance becomes authoritarian. And Gurdjieff's fourth way is also a trap, where it emphasizes fragmentation and intentional suffering. For disassociative individuals, this philosophy can dangerously reinforce psychic splitting, framing trauma symptoms as spiritual achievements. Now, spiritual bypassing occurs when mystical practices are used to avoid rather than heal emotional wounds. For disassociative mystics, this bypass becomes permanent. Their unresolved pain is rebranded as spiritual wisdom. Now, we look at epistemophobia, which is fear of being known. To be known is to be vulnerable, right? To be out there in the open. Survivors often develop epistemophobia, the fear of being seen or understood. Obscure spiritual language becomes a cloak, and it ensures safety from scrutiny, but distances authentic connection. Right, it's like on Facebook, let's say you know someone who is sexually promiscuous in high school and college, and that person's still doing that on the down low, but yet they're posting all of this spiritual knowledge and wisdom and posts on their Facebook. There's something that needs to be addressed there. Now, we look at mysticism and manipulation. Obscured language and mystical posturing can evolve into manipulation. When others seek meaning, the mystic holds power. Confusion breeds dependence. Instead of mutual exploration, the mystic becomes a gatekeeper. Now we look at recruitment and weaponization. Charismatic, disassociative mystics are highly recruitable by cults or covert networks. Their personas emotionally disarm others and can serve ideological manipulation. The wounded mystic becomes a vessel for hidden agendas. Now, look at it this way. Let's say you're dealing with a female, right? She's former military and her cousin's an occultist, or a relative or a brother or uncle could be a Mason or father. I've seen these patterns, and that's when you gotta be careful in terms of the who, what, where, and why. And you gotta look at the background. Okay, this person was like this in high school and college, then they ended up over here and then over here. It's like a series of events, and you have to put the dots together. And it's always individuals like this, unfortunately. Let's say where there's an agenda or a cult or a group wants to, let's say, deal with someone or hurt someone in terms of love and other aspects, where someone feels betrayed in terms of love or relationship. They can use that specific person, right, that wounded mystic, to be used against whoever in order to achieve that. So that's something to be mindful of. Now, the profile of the disassociative mystic is that these individuals are often unstable yet magnetic, insecure yet persuasive. Their pain makes them compelling. Their grandiosity, right, makes them appear visionary, but their wisdom is a repackaged wound. Now, when sacred work becomes control, that's when it's bad. Now, the mystic may genuinely believe they are healing others or they are doing good spiritual work for self and others, but when internal fragmentation is projected outward, the result is control, not compassion. Their teaching becomes a psychological defense, not a path to truth. Spiritual communities often fail to differentiate authentic insight from trauma expression. Systems like Gurdjieff's fourth way can validate dysfunction if context is ignored. Without discernment, they enable rather than challenge narcissistic mysticism. When trauma isn't integrated, the mystical self becomes performance art. The survivor dons robes of light, not to illuminate others, but to protect themselves. This performance can deeply mislead seekers of truth. So, is it really addressing the issues that they have, or is it just putting on a Band-Aid on a big wound that actually requires a surgery? This is not to say that all mystics are manipulators, that's not true. But we need to head towards healing, which is compassion and accountability. Not all mystics are manipulators. Many are deeply wounded people trying to make meaning of their life and what they went through. But compassion must not eclipse accountability. Healing requires confronting the mask without shame or flattery. And, to the white women out there, or any woman in general, right, regardless of race or religion, if, let's say, you experienced anything heartbreaking in your life, please have that compassion for your other fellow human beings. And don't jump from relation to relation, hurting people, breaking their hearts, but have accountability, right? And don't blame your trauma for that. Look, someone like me, I've been through a lot in my life as well. But I'm always calm, collected, cool, have love and compassion for my fellow human being without any hidden agendas. So we must be like that. Now, we do need discernment. This is what it's all about in the spiritual arena. Some mysticism arises from illumination, some from rupture, and we must hold both truths, the pain and the power. Only then can we foster spiritual spaces that heal rather than harm. Thank you so much. And again, the source is listed here, and I'll put it in the description below. The article by Shaykh Wahid Azal of the Noor FSO on how the mystic as trauma mask, how sexual abuse survivors sometimes become spiritual narcissists. So all credit is due to the Shaykh. Thank you for watching. If any questions or comments, please email me at salmanshaykh911@gmail.com. And of course, all of the information, knowledge, images, and video, etc., all of my work, it's for the purpose of fair use, nonprofit, and education purposes. So much love to all of you. Thank you. All rights reserved.